and welcome back for another Not Too Shabby Shop Design Team project. This is Marla with Mad About Cards and Crafts, and I'm so glad that you're joining me today. We are going to be creating this Lawn Fawn Christmas card with some of the fun products I was able to get in the Not Too Shabby Shop. We're starting with the Joy to All stamp set. This is a fun little Christmas scene set. I have the Merry Christmas die, and then I'm also going to be using the Christmas Garland die. That Christmas Garland die, I'm telling you, can be used year-round, and I think that it's going to be well-loved in my stash. You'll notice that I have a piece of 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch cardstock in my MISTI. I've placed it in the portrait orientation. I'm going to show you a really quick way. If you know that you are going to place something in the center of your card, I'm showing you a quick way to create a background. So I'm using some of the smaller stamps from the Joy to All stamp set. I'm using some of the ornaments. There's a couple stars I'm using, a candy cane, and a stocking. I did treat my paper with an anti-static tool. I'm going to do some heat embossing. So I'm adding Versamark ink to my stamps. You'll notice that I turned my panel around to the other side, so I just made sure that I kept it in the landscape orientation, and this is going to give me corner to corner coverage of those images. Now I'm going to place my panel back in my MISTI. This time I have turned it into a landscape orientation, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to place my stamps where I want them, and once I get them aligned, all I need to do is use that Versamark ink again. I'll turn the panel around so that I can get the next corner, and then I will use the same alabaster white embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. I wanted to use the alabaster white because I am going to do a little bit of ink blending, and I thought that because I was keeping my sentiment more of a white tone, that having that background with the white embossing would be the perfect match. So here we go again. I used my anti-static tool. I turned my paper around to get the other corner. I'm going to sprinkle my embossing powder on either side, and then I will take my heat tool to it and melt that embossing powder. I'm finding that I'm really loving the Catherine Puller inks for ink blending. I have been reaching for them more and more. I love the vibrancy of their colors. I've started with Coral Cabana, and you can see that I am using a larger brush. This is just helping me get more coverage quicker. And I am going to go over this a couple of times to really get that depth. You'll notice that I don't have any stamping in the middle. I stuck with just the corner to corner, but I do have a nice outline. I should mention that I did off camera take 2 stamps, so where the top and the bottom of the card meet right in the middle, I did place 1 stamp on either side, and I did heat emboss to make sure that we had a connection there. So I'm going around the edges with that Coral Cabana. I think it's such a beautiful color. And then I'm going to drop it on my glass mat. So I'm going to pick up that extra ink so I don't waste it. And I'm just going to add it into my card and just make sure that, as I said, it's not wasted. So this is water reactive ink. I've spritzed some water into my hands. One of my favorite ways to splatter is to do kind of like a clapping motion. I picked up some of the ink with my microfiber cloth, and then I dried it with my Ranger craft tool. I prefer to use my craft heat tool because it evenly distributes the heat, and the heat is not as intense as it is with my embossing gun. Here I'm adding some Tutti Frutti to just the corners, and that's going to add a little bit more depth. It's going to draw your eye into the middle just a little bit more. And then I brought in my Tim Holtz guillotine trimmer. I wanted to cut this panel down to 4 by 5 1/4 because I'm going to mat it. So I just cut a 1/8 inch off each side. I am going to do some splattering. I started with one of my smaller brushes and I was getting a very fine amount of snowfall on my card, but I want a blizzard, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm really going to be super heavy-handed as I love to be, and I am just going to go to town with this white gouache that I have on a stamp block. So all I do is put a little bit of gouache on there. I spritz a little bit of water and mix it up, and as you saw, I just did a tapping motion, making sure that I contained that in a box. I thought that I would add the Tutti Frutti to the middle, but I didn't like it, so I did come in with what was left on my brush of the Coral Cabana, and I just added that to make sure that it was nice and blended in the center. I've cut out the Merry Christmas die, and I did add some Hero Arts Unicorn White ink over the top of it. It is a pigment ink, so it's perfect for heat embossing. Since I'm using this fairy dust embossing powder from Brutus Monroe, it does have white with a lot of glitter in it, and I thought that just using that Hero Arts ink would really help me get a nice coverage. Of course, I do like to get dimension on my sentiments, so I did cut it out, the sentiment out 2 more times, and I am going to stack them. So you notice that I'm adding glue to the back. I'm going to stack the first 2, and then finally I will stack the embossed one right on top. That's going to give me, again, that little bit of dimension and a nice chipboard feel to this sentiment. This sentiment is going to be the anchor of my scene, so I wanted to make sure that it didn't get lost in the background and that it really stood out. We're going to do a little bit of Copic coloring. I did stamp my images out onto a piece of Copic Express It paper. I stamped it with Brutus Monroe's Raven ink, which is Copic and watercolor friendly, and again we're doing that Copic coloring. I'm starting with an R14. I do go tip to tip with R12 to blend out just a little bit more, and finally I finish off with the R11. This color combination is perfect for the background that I have, so it's really going to complement it. And then I'm going to bring in some greens to color the boys' little jammies. I love the images from this little stamp set. I think obviously that I'll be able to use several of the pieces year round. Maybe not the sentiments, but the boy and the girl and the dog. And then I could certainly mask off the gingerbread man in the dog bowl and add something to that. The presents are also usable year round as well. So I've started onto the little boy. My G21 was dry, and I'm almost certain that I did fill that previously, so I'm thinking I have a crack somewhere in that pen. So I did end up having to improvise, do a little bit of tip to tip with the G20 and the G24. Here I've colored up those little laurel leaves, and these are, again, this is another piece that I can use year round. It comes with those leaves, it comes with those bows. I started out with that G20, and then I took the G24 and I added a little bit of a flicking motion. For the bow, I added the R11, and finally I did the flicking with an R14. So the same colors that I used in both pairs of pajamas. For the skin tones, I do use E11 as my darkest color for shading. I blended out with an E2, and finally I brought in an E00. For the hair, I'm going to color both of their hair the same. So I do use E23, E25, and E27. And you'll notice that I am doing a flicking motion. I kind of map it out with my lightest color to see where I want that dark flicking to be, and then I blend it out with my midtone, and finally I bring in that E23, and that just blends everything together beautifully. I cut it out using my brother's Scan and Cut. I do not have the dies, and then I did color the Christmas presents off camera. I'm going to start building up my scene. As you can see, I took 2 of the laurel leaves and I glued the ends of them together. I'm going to put this bow together. I started to wrap it one way and then I realized that I wasn't getting the bend in the paper that I was looking for, so I had to go in the other direction. And I'm going to add a little bit of glue to hold that centerpiece of the bow in place. I'll use my reverse tweezers as I did with the laurel leaves, and I'll just hold that in place for just a moment. And I'm going to put the other set of laurel leaves together, and you'll notice that I do match them up to the set that's on the right side to make sure that I get the same kind of distribution and angle of those leaves so that they match up beautifully. There is a bottom piece to the die for the bow, and I decided that I did want to add it to my floral or greenery piece, and so I did color it up the same way. I added that R11 and then I just did a little flicking motion with that R14. I'm going to glue those 2 pieces together once I get it off my little Cricut mat. So I used to use a Cricut mat all the time, and then I kind of got away from it, but I've been using die cuts a lot more, and I really do enjoy working with die cuts. It's much easier to color them for me if I just put them on those little Cricut mats, and so that's what I was using to color my images. I wanted, because I did cut that card panel down, I did need something to mat this onto, so I did take a piece of white cardstock. I cut out the center so that I didn't waste it. So I took one of my decorative rectangles, cut out the center. I used the G24, I believe, around the edges of the frame to make sure that I'm getting a same color match and continuity in my card. Once I get this centered, because I am going to have to lift this up, do I ever get it on the first try? Probably not, but I will lift it up and I will get it centered, and then I'm going to start gluing some of my pieces down. So I have the laurel leaves that I'm adding to the center on the left and the right side. I'll add my Merry Christmas chipboard piece over the top. I'm going to make sure that that 3 of the pieces are kind of loose and hanging out, but because of the way that my boy and girl, you'll see I'm kind of using that girl to figure out where I want that Merry Christmas. Once I figure that out, I do just go ahead and glue it over the top of the bottom right hand piece. Right there. I was thinking about pulling it out and I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm adding one of the other bows from the Christmas garland to the tittle on my eye, and then I'm going to add a little bit of foam tape to the back of the boy and the girl. Because that Merry Christmas is 3 layers thick, I do need to put that foam tape on the back to make sure that they are both pretty level on my card. I'm going to glue this to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding card base. And then we're going to finish off with the accessory pieces. So I did color up, as I mentioned, the gifts off camera. I do like to try to keep things in odd numbers, so I have 5 presents. I'll place 3 in the center and 1 in each of the boy and the girl's hand. And that's going to be my card for today. So I want to thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave me a comment. Let me know if you're a Lawn Fawn fan. Over at the Not Too Shabby shop, Jamie just got in the Valentine release from Lawn Fawn. It is packed full of so many fun little goodies. Oh, I did forget that I did add some of these holly berries as well to add that little pop of red. And that's going to be it for today. So thank you again so much for watching. I hope that I see you back here again soon. And until next time, have a Merry Christmas and thanks so much for watching.